Hi, welcome to my channel. We have come to the part where I have to show you how to disassemble the bolt and the FCG. And before I start, I want to point out that if you have a hard time removing this hinge pin, and it's located right here, and what you have to do is just loosen the set screw right here, and it'll be a lot easier to remove that, so you don't need to punch it out. So just want to point that out first. And the next thing I'm going to show you is the FCG, and then I'm going to move over to the bolt. Okay, for the FCG, you need a vise, a towel, because you don't want to mar the finish, and what you need to do is remove the pin that's on the left side. Okay, this pin, I already partially removed it. Okay, and I try to punch it from the bottom up, and it wouldn't go too much, so I did from the top bottom, as you can see. And to do that, I put make sure you have a paper, have a cloth, and put it like this, and tighten the grip. Do not tighten on the receiver, because the receiver is a very thin sheet metal. Okay, now I'm going to turn this around so you can have a better look, but you can see I'm clamped to the grip. Okay, and the front part is the trigger guard is resting on the trigger guard, so this is how it is. Now it requires a very skinny punch, and I don't have one, so what I did is just took a regular flooring nail. I should buy one, but I don't have one, so I just use a regular flooring nail, and I use a Dremel and made it thinner to the size I need, and I partially already punched it out, so I'm just gonna tap it, be gentle, and tap it the rest of the way. And this is the pin. Okay, and it's like a roll pin. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that here, and let's remove the vise so I can have some room. Okay, once you remove the pin on the left side, you don't need to touch the one on the right, just the left selector. You then be able to remove the selector itself. Put that aside, and this is what it looks like. Okay, and let's see what I should do. Actually, I should release the tension that's on the hammer right now, and I'm going to hold the hammer with my thumb and release the tension. Okay, the next thing I have to do is push the selector from the left to the right. Okay, and okay, it's catching on something. It's catching on the locking plate spring. This is a locking plate spring, and to do that I need to put a large screwdriver in between the locking plate and twist it a bit, and there you see it jumped out. And this is what the selector looks like. And there's these two holes on the selector itself, and that's where it where the spring sits on the indent. And here is the spring right here. It also acts like a locking for the hammer pin and the trigger pin. So what I have to do to remove it is put your finger on this tab right there and just pull it up like this, and then wiggle it out. Okay, so this is the tab. Okay, the bottom part of this plate locks onto like this, and those two indents here, it sits this little part here. I'll grab this. This part sits on this two indent for your safe and for your fire. So it actually goes like this, like that. Okay. So if I were to switch from fire to safe, see, now I just move one over. That's where the spring is. All right. This is what it looks like on the other side. All right. The next thing you remove is the cross pin for the hammer, and all you need to do is push it from the right side, the pin, to the left side, like that. And I'm going to pull the hammer and the string. Now you'll notice there's a fair amount of wear on the hammer just from caulking, and it hasn't even been fired yet, and yet it looks like a fair amount of wear on this hammer. Just want to point that out. And then the next thing to do is again, from the right side to the left side, release the trigger pin, and it goes like that. And here's the trigger pin. I don't actually know if it's the same size, but it sure looks like it. It looks, yep, looks pretty close. Or it is the same. And then you pull up on the trigger sear assembly. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, now that is your FCG disassembly. Now I'm going to put her back because this can be pretty complicated. So I'm just going to put the hammer back first, and then take the cross pin and slide it right across like this. Okay, it's flush on the right side. I'll actually take a look what the inside looks like before I put the hammer pin in. There's a reinforcement plate right here. It's chrome, or pretty shiny metal. It helps rivet part of this rivet here. These screws, they're not rivet. These screws into this plate, and then also has a reinforcement for the pin on this side. So take the hammer, okay, like this, put it in like that, grab the cross pin and then slide it. Okay. There. Pretty simple. Now make sure that these two spring that works on the hammer spring is also properly seated on the sear. Okay, make sure it's seated properly. There's at the end of these two spring has a little hook, and they should be seated properly. Alright, so the last thing is left is actually the last two things that's left is putting in the crosspin, hammer crosspin and trigger crosspin back in, and you just slide it in like this, wiggle it if you have to, and then push it down and make sure it locks against the trigger pin, and it should be all the way down. And it should actually look like this. There should be a little bit of the locking pin. You should be able to see a little bit of that. Okay. Now once you get that, now it's time to slide the selector in, and you put it through like this. And okay, I got the receiver set up in the vise. It'll just be a lot easier because of this tension of the plate, and I'm trying to insert this back, and the top goes into the indents, and so I'm trying to push this down at the same time, and then I'll push it across. Now to do that, I find that it's easier to just use a big screwdriver and try to get this in. Okay, I finally tapped it and it went in. So let me remove this and show you what it looks like. Actually, I'll need it again, and as you can see, it's in, and the next thing I do is put the selector back in, and if you remember, and there it is, I'm gonna have to insert this back in from the bottom. I tapped it from the top to the bottom, so now I'm going to put it in the bottom. Oops, I dropped it. I'll try that again. Okay, and I'm just going to get it started first. Okay, partially in. Then I'm going to put it back in the vise. Make sure. And then I'm going to use a punch. I'm going to tap this back in. Be gentle, don't force it. Now I got it in, and let's test it. Yep, it looks good. Okay, got that working. So that part is done. Next is the bolt. Okay, to disassemble the bolt, you got to remove this from the carrier and just turn the cam out to here and just pull it straight out. Okay, the first thing you do is remove the firing pin, And that you don't actually even need a tool. Just with your fingers, compress the back of the firing pin, and just use any pin, and you can just push the cross pin out. The firing pin, retaining pin, right there. That's what it looks like. And the firing pin and the spring should slide out from the back, and this is what it looks like. This recess here is where this firing pin retaining pin sits, like this. Okay. Now, remove the spring. You just have to wiggle it out, like that. Okay, now as far as the extractor goes, I see there's a extractor pin, but the other side, it looks like a rivet, and it looks like it's flared. So I could be wrong, but I try to punch it, it won't move, but it looks like a flare to me. It looks like this is not meant to be disassembled. So if that's correct or not, if anybody knows, please let me know. So therefore, I'm not going to be disassembling this extractor because it's not meant to be. Now to the ejector. Now, as you can see, I already partially removed the pin of the ejector pin. All I need to do is punch it out with a very thin punch. Now, you don't need to go you don't need to punch it all the way out. Just and make sure you put your finger so the ejector does not fly out. Okay. And now, oh, here is the firing pin. Now the ejector pin. And the ejector is held in by the punch. I'm going to push the ejector and pull the punch out. And this is the ejector. Now there should be a spring in here too. Okay, spring is not coming out, but it's in there. Alright, now to reassemble the ejector, I'll just show you what, as you can see, the firing pin, no, the ejector pin goes right across and it's on the upside of the ejector, so therefore you have to put the cutout on the upside, like this. Okay. Now, it has to be recessed in a bit, a very small amount of recess. And so therefore, I'm going to use a washer. I'm going to put the washer right here. I'm going to use the vise to help me push the ejector in, and the washer is okay, so it's just like that. With the hole, I can see the hole is clear from here to the back, so now I'm going to take the pin, ejector pin, put it in the slot, and tap it in. Tap it in. Okay, now I can release the vise, the tension. You see the washer I was using Now I just use the washer because I need to have it pushed in a bit, because the ejector is not in line with the face of the bolt. It's in a little bit, about the same thickness, and that's why I use the washer to push that in a bit. So I could, but now that is in, I could just tap it all the way in. Okay, it's in. I'll test to make sure the ejector works by pressing on it, and it does spring back. So now we put the spring in the firing pin and push it all the way to the back. Now again, cutout for the retaining pin is on the upside, and you use the thumb, push it in, grab the pin, and just okay, the pin must have moved. Let me use a punch to line it up. Oh, there it is. Went in. Finally. Okay, now test to make sure the firing pin springs back and the point of the firing pin protrudes from the face of the bolt. And so that's all done. So both are done, the bolt and the FCG. So thank you very much for joining me, and please subscribe.